So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, on this really sad, in a way, weather-wise morning. We hope this will brighten our day. This year so far, we've has been really interesting, I would say, and not the least very challenging for many of us. And the chamber has been very, very busy during this autumn, where we've tried to give a view on and discuss trends in, hopefully for you, relevant themes, and such as, amongst other things, defense industry and the security, the EU exit, not the least, financial forecast to keep everyone informed on where we're going financially, how we could restart our economy, how we need to think in leadership and diplomacy in crisis, and with really the aim of supporting our members. And we will still have, as you will see later on, a very interesting program ahead of us before the end of the year. So we hope to see you many more times before Christmas. So if you missed an event, we share presentations and frequently also recordings of the webinars via our website and social media. And with the aim really of these webinars is to give our members and cooperation partners a solid foundation and a platform to discuss some of the presumptions for the future development of the world. And we are, of course, also happy to refer and introduce you to one another. So do just let us know if you would like us to do that. And we would like these webinars to be as interactive as possible, so we rely on you all to ask questions today. Before handing over to our guest of honor and speaker from Combient, I would like to underline some quick housekeeping rules. You would know them, most of them by now, but just in case, this presentation will be recorded. And please do keep yourself on mute until given the word. And as I said, please ask questions during the presentation by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Should you have any tech issues, do email Emil. So, we're living in a fast-changing world, and somehow it feels like, I would say, the change is going faster and faster. And we can see the change and transformation in, I would say, almost every aspect of our lives. We also see an increased need for, and also evidence of, cooperation cross borders and cross industry. But to keep up with these changes, we need to speed up digital transformation across all industries. And I think many of us have at least started doing that. To tell us more, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our guest of honor and speaker, Mats Agervi, who's CEO of Combient. And Combient, if you don't know, specializes in AI and open innovation to tackle automation changes, help making better use of data by using machine learning. So Mats has a background from different senior positions within Ericsson in India, several senior positions at IBM in the Nordics and also in India. And before that, several years at IT experience, I should say, at Digital and Compact. And that, Mats, really makes you an expert in this field, I would say. So where do we need to go from here to succeed in business? Mats Agervi will this morning share his expertise on digitalization, a business imperative. Mats, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for this kind introduction. When you're listening to and you hear several years and several years, you realize that you're pretty old nowadays.
No. That shows experience, I would say.
It shows experience. That is great to have. And good morning to everyone. Great to get this opportunity to e-connect you on a very dark and rather sad November day like this. But I have the opportunity then to talk about something which is very close to my heart, and that is digitalization. And while I share the presentation here, I also want to, continue a little bit where you ended, Christina, because we for sure live in a fast changing world, but also a world with increasing complexity and increasing uncertainty. And when you bring those things together, it is obvious that your digitalization capability and your capability to cooperate will define the future leaders. And those are two business imperatives that doesn't come so easy for traditional incumbent large industry players. And that is the challenge where I will focus today. So the presentation will be very much about what are the digitalization key fundamentals which we need to fix to go further into the digitalization, but also focus into how we need to change our ways of working, because without changing our ways of working, it doesn't help that we have more technology or that we are gathering talent, because we will continue to do what we do today, but just using technology for doing it. And that is not creating new business models. It's not creating new innovation. And during the presentation, I will use Combient as an example on what's happening, but also how companies can come together and cooperate and make this happen. The digital story for me today, it starts actually in India, and it's the year 2014. And everyone is talking about digital transformation, but how do we actually make it happen? Was a question that Marcus Wallenberg asked me when he visited me at Ericsson in Delhi. And the reason for this was that I was heading then an operation which had the aim to help Ericsson through a rather big transformation at that time, to go from the telecom to the ICT model. And to do that, they needed to transform heavily on the IT side. And India was a given place, the center of the world when it comes to IT on a global level, where you can make this happen. So in just 4 years, we both were ramping up talent. We went from 0 to 20,000 in just 4 years, which meant that almost 20% of Ericsson's workforce globally was belonging to this operation. But also we were working a lot with technology. And already at that time, we used open source, we used cloud and technology, which actually made it possible for us to start to automate this huge amount of data, which we were starting to get in from the smartphones, which was taking over the world. And when Marcus listened in to what we were doing, he felt that you are doing this stuff today, but how can we take that knowledge and help us to actually ensure that the competitiveness of the Swedish industry will remain after the digitalization? After this question, we met a couple of times. Every time I was in Sweden, we continued to discuss, this challenge. How do we make it happen? And the group of people involved in the discussion became bigger and bigger. And Tom Johnston, for example, joined as well, together with Håkan Buske. After a while, the answer became pretty obvious. The best way to make this to happen for the Swedish industry was actually to collaborate. And as a result of that, we agreed that if we can get 5 to 6 companies to join a collaboration platform, then let's start. In just 4 months, in a record time, we had 11 companies who said yes. And that led to that we were starting up Combient in January 2015. Strange, it's almost 6 years since now. So what is Combient today? Christina touched on that before, but Combient is a network of large enterprises, Finnish and Swedish companies, altogether 29. It's traditional companies who share the same challenge, meaning that they need to transform. It's not Klarna, it's not Spotify, because they could start it in a digital model from the beginning. But all of those companies, they truly need to transform their operation to become digital. If you look to a group of company, it's a pretty impressive number of brands. And in total, the group has more than 700,000 employees and a joint turnover of more than 150 billion euro. So it's a power not only in the Nordics, but actually globally as well. But more important, it is also a huge collective intelligence and knowledge source, which is something which we are using heavily in Combient to make things happen. If you talk about Combient then as a company, not as a network, we are a group of 75 people today. We are, I think, 50 nationalities, so it's truly a global team. And of course, there's a lot of heavy knowledge and heavy expertise in this team. But the big thing, of course, if you really want this to scale and happen, is to utilize the network, to utilize those 700,000 people to move forward. Because if we can do that, if we can use that asset, then we can do whatever we want, more or less. And the way we do this is to offer a collaboration platform where companies can come in and learn from each other, but also learn together, and finally, to create together, but with one key purpose, to help them to become digital leaders in their industry. As I mentioned, it is now more than 5 years ago since we started, and a lot of things have happened since then. If you look into the group of companies, they have done amazing things in creating new customer intimacy models, in creating products with digital features, to create new as-a-services models, to drive automation, and so on. And for example, if you take SEB and talk about them, they are now a digital bank to a large extent. They have actually embraced the fintech startups instead of seeing them as a threat. They have created a unit they call SEBX, which actually task is to try to disrupt themselves. If you take another example, SKF, the big producer of bearings, they are now selling rotation as a service, where you go from selling a product to actually offer the service with availability and the quality which the customer wants to have. If you take another example, Konne, which is a large escalator and elevator producer, they have connected all their escalators and elevators in the world to a cloud, and are now able to offer services like 24/7 connected services, where actually they help their customers to optimize the people flow. Another example is Husqvarna, and Husqvarna took a couple of bets a couple of years ago, where they realized that autonomy as a technology with AI was extremely important, that they have to go away from combustion engines to electric engines, and finally, that they had to think about platforms. And if you look at where they are today, they have automowers, which is now conquering the world. They have more and more electric tools. And finally, they are building platforms around gardens. If you look in, for example, in Gardena, you have a platform where you can connect all your things to the same platform. And if you look to the result for them, for example, and read their last earnings report, they actually reported that the revenue connected to autonomous technology, to battery, and to gardening was growing rapidly, more than 25% year after year. So for sure, things are happening. For sure, we have a lot of successes within the companies. But even so, I would say that the hardest part remains. We are just in the beginning of a journey where we are starting to get effect of this, but it's still rather fragmented. And to get moving now and really make this to become a full transformation of business models and throughout the organizations, we need both to fix a number of what we call fundamental digitalization challenges, but also, maybe even more important, to change our ways of working. And let me start with some of the fundamental digitalization challenges we see and connect them as well to how we try to address them together in Combient. If I start with AI and automation, this is an exciting area, and of course, one of the biggest things when it comes to digitalization, because this is about data, sharing data, and be able to use machine learning and other things, both to make good judgments, but also actually to make things happen. Most companies, when we look at our network, has today used AI, at least in one use case, which they have scaled in their operation. But if you look a little bit further and look for companies who have done several of those, you find very, very few. Actually, less than 20% have scaled several use cases in production. Why is it so? Well, of course, it's because of talent, because you don't have a right of talent. But it's also back out of ways of working, that people out in the operation don't understand how to utilize this and think data and think AI when they are doing their job. And finally, it's about data in itself. I think over 80% of the companies say that data ownership and data quality is a blocker for them to scale their AI operation. So how can you address this together through a Combient network? Well, we are trying to support the companies by scaling AI, first through give them access to competence. So we have a shared pool of the world's best data scientists and engineers, which is helping the company and work together with them. They go in as well and help to do business projects to ensure that they can execute and scale them in their operation. We are offering as well to the group of companies something we call Applied Data Science Campus, which is actually a training both for them to build up their own data scientists, which we call citizen data scientists, but also to build up the translators, the people who maybe sits out in the organization and will be so crucial to generate data, but also to drive innovation. And that could be, for example, a product engineer in Scania who needs to think data and machine learning at the time they actually design their product. And now we have this training, which is now rolled out at large scale at companies like Scania and Ericsson, and are helping them then to ensure that they both have talent, but maybe even more important, to understand how to use and deploy AI and machine learning in their operation. And finally, as you do that, they also ensure that they start to collect the right data. Another challenge which we see in the network is open innovation. And this is, of course, a broad area which goes from customers to startups to platforms, etc. But one area which is maybe the starting point is to start to work with startups. And most companies in our network is working with startups, but they don't do it in a systematic approach. It's more an ad hoc happening. They run onto a startup, thinks that it's interesting and start to do something. And when you look into this as well, it's pretty obvious that they also are lacking due to the fact that they don't have a systematic approach corporate venturing. So it's less than 20% of a company today who has a corporate venture arm, which is much less than what you see maybe in Europe or in US especially. How can we help there? Well, one way of doing it is to build a systematic platform for the network of companies here. And we had two companies who saw this opportunity where we could use actually the power of a brand as a storefront to attract the best startups in the world. And now we have together built a model where we define a specific business need as a scalable project. And then we go out and ask the companies in the world, the startups, how they can solve it in the best possible way. So we don't start with technology, we start with a business problem. This has been immensely successful. And we have now more than 15,000 startups in our database. And we work with more than 150 ecosystem owners like Amazon Venture, or if you talk about in China, Tencent. Most important is that it also led to a fantastic hit rate. We have done what we call 51 then scalable projects. Out of those, 31 has now been into commercial agreements. And still we have 6 pilots which is still running. So it could potentially be up to 38. But also for the startups, we have cut down the sales time immensely, but also we have given them not one contact, they often got a contract with several companies in the network as we share this knowledge between ourselves. Cybersecurity is another key fundamental challenge for the companies. And when you look into where the problems are, it's not in the traditional cybersecurity area. I say we do that very, very well. But the problem starts to happen when you share data between companies in supply chains or similar areas. And there we see that I think almost 0% say that they are in full control and feel that they are managing all the risks which are there. One initiative we have started there now in a group of 6 companies is to look into how we can build a secure data exchange model, where you actually, in an anonymous and secure way, can transfer data in value chains. And that is something which we now have created as a beta, and we are now planning to implement during next year as a product. So this is one way where we think that through the network and through joint effort, we can crack this problem, both from a security perspective, but maybe more important, also from a business perspective, to be able to share data. Finally, and maybe the biggest challenge, is around organization and culture. And I will come back a little bit to this, but one data point, if we look at our network, is, for example, the reskilling and upskilling challenge ahead of us. And it's rather massive. When we ask our HR managers how many of the employees needs reskilling and upskilling, they say more than 50% within 2 to 5 years. And to manage that one, we have together then again, as always in our network, done co-creation. And we have built up what we call a learning experience platform. A platform which will engage and motivate people to take education. And that creates lifelong learning and continuous learning. And we have also created now what we call a national learning portal, which we did from a country perspective to help in this tough situation we are now, when a lot of people maybe are out of job and need to reskill, but also to help the SMB area. So the government then will have one interface when it comes to all digital education and courses to companies and people across Sweden. The second thing we were working with was about content, that we actually co-create content which is needed to drive transformation for leaders, for ways of working, but also to access the best courses we have in the world. And that has led to that we are now partnered with IMD, MIT, for example, but also a reseller of the world's leading course providers like Coursera or LinkedIn Learning. Those are fundamental challenges which needs to be fixed if you are going to be able to really transform. And there might be more and areas which you need to address, but I would also like to discuss now maybe the biggest challenge as we see, because even if talent and technology is important and is the foundation, it is actually the new ways of working that will lead to new business models, and also to that you transform your whole operation and organization. I would say that we now talk about digitalisation 2.0, where you're going from the first phase, which has been very much about installing digital technology, to actually implementing it and changing your organization. And this is one big area where we, through the network, is discussing and sharing knowledge and try to find the way for the future. And let me give you some examples on the challenges which we face. First of all, we are all in COVID-19 now, and there is a great thing with that, and that is that actually the digitalization effort when it comes to implementing remote tools and virtual and digital meeting tools has exploded. And the second part, which is great with COVID-19, is that all of us have now learned to use them. Is that good? Absolutely. But have we really changed the ways of working? Don't we have the same meeting culture now as we had before? It just happens to be that now we do it virtual. And in one way, I would say that, at least for me, we have also been more efficient having meetings. I feel that I have meeting all the time because you can just add them on and you don't have any time in between. But is this really digitalization? Yeah, it is. It's the technology for sure. But I would say it's not real digitalization until we are changing our ways of working. And in this area, it's about going away from a meeting culture to a data-driven and information-driven culture where you don't have meeting to follow up. You have meetings to innovate, to learn, and drive things forward. And that's the next phase, which we need to be much, much better on. The other area is, of course, open innovation, as we mentioned before, to go away from this attitude, which you often have in engineering-driven companies, but also other big companies, not invented here. And you start to work actively with customers, with startups and partners, but even with competitors, to be able to drive innovation from a customer perspective, 360 degrees, gather as much data as you can. That's when you are starting the real innovation, when you are gathering domain expertise from several areas. Another area which is crucial is to start to work agile. And in itself, it's about being able to break down those large silos which we have organizational in most large companies today. Break them down, create task teams which goes out and work together, gathering cross knowledge to solve the problem in the shortest possible time. And after that, the team disappears again. It's about daring to experiment and fail and maybe learn even faster from your failure, which means that those yearly budgets we always have, which is so to say, ensuring that we stay on track on what we decided a year ago, that we are using return on investments as a way to decide on projects, is starting to be replaced by more milestone approaches, where we decide that we are going here, and after that we decide what the next step will be, instead of trying to plan things for a very, very long time. And finally, it's about decentralization, to dare to give up the control, to create fast-moving autonomous units which will drive things for you instead of large pyramid structures which is controlling. So to change your ways of working, it's all about, in the end, to have a leadership and courage to change things. And I think it starts with that you dare to have a compelling, challenging vision, which you're driving throughout the company, that you're ready to future-proof your organization and operation by investing now heavily in digitalization, that you don't see your middle management as blockers, but you bring them on into the journey because they are important to make this happen. And to make that happen, it's often about governance and KPIs. You need to adjust them and change them, and actually to foster those autonomous units which can decentralize, drive things faster than if you try to do it in a traditional pyramid thing. And in the end, it's about walking the talk and drive the execution. So is this easy? No, it's not. This is probably the hardest thing you can deal with when it comes to big organizations. But at the same time, to me, this is what I call digitalization 2.0, where it's the new business imperative. And either you adapt to this or you end up in a situation where you will be out of business. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mats. That was a really interesting presentation, and I think food for thought for all of us. I know that there might be some questions awaiting, but I thought I'll start, Mats. We had a really good discussion previously as well, and it's all about digitalization and prepare your organization for the future and for the now, really. How do you see people, you were saying, to future-proof your organization and decentralize your organization, and how leadership need to be thinking change. How do you see organizations, people like us, younger, older, different industries, different countries, work with digitalization and corporate culture? How do we make sure that this all fits into the new platform of digital ways of working?
I mean, I think, it's always hard to change cultures. Cultures is a result of how you're running your business and the way we work, right? That's in the end what will define the culture. So I think, to really make it happen, it's about having strong leaders with the courage actually to change. Also change for real, meaning that you dare to give up your control, right? And start to decentralize it. And I think that's the starting point. And again, it's rather scary, right, to do that. If you're running a company, a listed company, and you are measured on your quarterly earnings reports, right? To dare to make those investments you need to do and dare to give up the control, it's not easy. It's not easy. but that's where you need to start. And then I think when you talk about us all as leaders, I mean, look at the situation we are in now in COVID-19, where our employees and peers are spread out and we don't meet them at the office anymore. I think, for us, we need to adapt and we need to change how we lead people as well. And that goes from having traditional meetings where we follow up with them to maybe gather them in our sessions where we have individual meetings where we use communication platforms and social network stuff in our areas, right, to drive our leadership. I mean, we need to change the way we are. We don't have the same, call it old-fashioned model where we had some gold on our shoulders and could dictate or drive it in a more direct way. And now we need to work in a much more digital way, utilizing how this works and how it's more as a horizontal model where people need to be engaged in a different way than what we are used to, right?
So if anyone has a question they would like to ask, I will point at some of you in a minute, but please raise your hand. You can use that button as well, and we'll just come to you in a minute. Mats, we had the honor of listening to you about 2 years ago. We can't really say for sure because time is flying. But do you see any dramatical changes since then? The speed, the focus, the willingness, the views of companies that you work with?
Absolutely, I do. But I think the big difference now is maybe that company has invested a lot in technology. They have experimented, they have done a lot of things. Now they start to be eager to see business result. And right now, I think most of the CEOs I talk to, they are into what we discuss now as digitalisation 2.0, right? How do you actually change your ways of working? How do you actually implement new business models? And based on that, how do you drive new organizational models which will enable this to happen? So we are right now, I would say, in the tipping point from the installation phase into the implementation phase. This is the time when it's going to happen for real. And I think that's the big difference I feel, which have happened since 5 years ago when, I mean, it was enough to say digitalization, right? It was so hype and everyone got big ears and wanted to understand what is that, right? We know what it is now, but now it's about us to adapt it and bring it into our ways of working.
So a company, small or medium-sized or large, can they do this themselves, or do they need to bring in help? Do we need outside support and analysis to actually go from what we feel is kind of, oh, well, this is comfortable, change is difficult. Do we need outside help, or could companies do this themselves?
Honestly, I think it's very few companies who can do it themselves today, and it's maybe the large tech giants, right? But I also don't think that it needs to be help in a traditional way where you also always have had this, supplier or vendor customer relation. You go to a consultancy company or you ask someone to build something for you. I think now it's more about building ecosystems, right? Ecosystems around you which help you to do things. It's about building collaboration platforms where you work together with peers in other companies. And let me give you 2 examples, because I mean, this is what Combient is about, right? We are a collaboration platform. And when I think about Combient, we try to think like an ecosystem and act like startups, right? So we are building a very flat structure, even within Combient, when it comes to our structure, right? Where we build autonomous, self-driven teams with a very clear mission, and they get some money, and then they have to stand on their own legs. If they don't do that, they go away and they have to do something else. But also, of course, we are building communities of experts between the companies. So we have different forums from, of course, tech people, which is obvious, right? But also HR managers and actually legal people who meets together to understand what does digitalization means for my job and for my company, and how do I ensure that I'm not the blocker, but the enabler for this, right? And by gathering those people, they learn faster, right? Because they learn from each other, and also the chance to actually cover all things which happens in the world is much bigger, because you have a chance to listen to other people and what they do. So it's an important way to make things happen. We have even taken it to the level where one of the company, for example, had a challenge. They had implemented a new business model and wanted to then adjust the IT model and the IT operating model to this one. And instead of taking in a consultancy, they said, can't we do this together? So we gathered 3 peers, 3 CIOs from other companies who had been into similar journeys as them. And then they did a peer-to-peer review and gave their hands-on, call it, examples on what they should have done if they were the CIO in this company, right? So I think there is a lot of new ways to do it, but for sure, you can't do it yourself. But personally, I think we also need to think about how do we change this way of getting help, and how do we change this way of working together, opening up much more than what we have done in the past, and not think only about traditional ways of doing this with vendors which we bring in and ask them to solve it for us.
That's so interesting. And this way of working together is, of course, extremely important, and something we try to do all the time as well, offering our members a platform to use, to share their knowledge and promote themselves, but also to network. And we try to do that via referrals. I have so many questions, but I see we're running out of time. I would love to bring in Tom Johnston, and anyone else who would like to say something, please raise your hand. Tom, would you comment on this or have a question? You know much about this already, I know.
Yeah, to comment on it, yeah, I can comment on it. To have a question to Mats, no. I'm fairly close, as you know, to Mats in the way of working. I have the pleasure of working with him a lot there. I just want to reinforce a couple of points that Mats made, if I could. Firstly, I fully support that we're now into digitalisation 2.0. If you actually look at digitalisation 1.0, it was much more about efficiency and effectiveness in your operations. Digitalisation 2.0 is about how you change business models, how you change things, not that you make today's way of working more efficient, but that you actually work in a different way completely, and especially on the business models is extremely important. And I actually think that what we've seen during this terrible crisis of COVID is actually accelerating the introduction of new business models. The business to business and business to consumer areas are being merged together, ways of working being merged together, and you're getting much more instead of these big companies that are part of Combient being business to business, they're actually going more and more also to business to consumer, linking direct to consumers. That's a change in the business model, and that will put a lot more pressure on how they run their business, how they operate, etc. One other point I'd like to add in is I fully support Matt's comment about changing how you run companies, decentralization, putting out authority, responsibility out into the operations, because you need to move faster, etc. The one clarification I would like to make, and I'd welcome Matt's view, is as a CEO, you don't give up control. That you don't do. What you do is you change how you control. You control through people rather than controlling yourself. You control through the organization by giving out authority, responsibility, but you have a different control mechanism. I don't think any of the CEOs we talk to would say they don't control it, but I think they control it in a different way by decentralization and putting out authority and responsibility to the operations. But we're on a very fast track, I think, in digitalization now, because I've heard many examples where people have said that what was planned in their company for 5, 6, 7 years time frame, they've been able to do in 5, 6, 7 months now, or majority of it. So I think we're on an acceleration just now. So I would only say watch this space in all companies. And I think one last point, if I could, is that, as Matt's mentioned, it's used to be very much in manufacturing and finance, etc. But we're seeing more and more use of digitalization as a means to involve other areas like HR, like legal, areas that probably were in the periphery before. And I think that's when a company really changes, when digitalization embraces all they do, not just part of what they do.
Thank you very much, Tom. Mats, would you like to comment on Tom's? What do you say?
I think it's well said. And as you said about control, what I think, you know, when you talk about giving up control, I mean more or less that you give assets, you give resources, you give financials needed, right, to make a task, but you let the execution happen with the team, more autonomous than you do in a traditional model where you sit and follow up. And then maybe you put in a milestone instead and say that this is what you're going to achieve after 3 months. And if you haven't been able to do that, we either decide to reshape the product or we close it down, right? So it's about learning and be able to move faster by getting more freedom to execute an action and focus on what you are driving, right? That's what I mean with daring to give a control or decentralize for organizations.
To move faster, I think that will be probably the last comment. I knew we should have taken a full hour. There's so many more questions I would like to ask, and I would have loved to bring in some of the guests as well. But maybe we can do that in writing and follow up later on. Thank you ever so much, Mats Agervi, for sharing your expertise with us this morning. Is there any last comments you would like to send with us this tragically grey and dull morning?
I think, as we said, you know, we have, I think, the most fun part ahead of us, right? Because now we have utilized the technology to do things more efficiently. And now we go in digitalization 2.0, which to me is a lot about the time when we will innovate. And innovation is fun. That's what we should spend our time on, right? Not on administration and bureaucratic stuff. And now, through the digitalization, that will enable us to work together, cross the companies, cross the ecosystem, and create innovation, which will benefit our customers, which we have. So I say, you know, let's be happy now, because we are into the fun part to innovate and come up with new things.
And on the point of innovation, we will see you all on the 30th of November speaking about the necessity of innovation to survive. And that will also include Saab Group and Centigo speaking on that. So I'm very pleased about the presentation and this event this morning. Thank you again, Mats. And I look forward to seeing you and the rest of the audience later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.